Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. You can call me Biscoon. And the following video is going to be the first in a series of videos regarding a certain subject that I'm relatively passionate about. And I've been passionate about for a few years now. It is a subject that's very important in terms of world history. For the past 1400 years at most, that affects the lives of well over 1 billion people around the world. I am, of course, talking about what I've been referring to as Musselmanity. Anyone who can put two and two together will realize that you'll be saying, wait, Musselmanity? Isn't it? I'm going to stop you right there because I don't believe that for a second. And allow me to explain why. And it all starts not long after I graduated high school. Not long after that, I went down a series of rabbit holes, most of which are not relevant to this discussion, at least not right now. But one of the rabbit holes I went down is what I can only describe as the Salafi YouTube rabbit hole. And you might be very confused by what I mean by that. To which, anyone who doesn't know, the term Salafi or Salafism is a revivalist movement within what I've been calling Musselmanity that seeks to quote-unquote restore it to what they believe that it's supposed to be. It has its roots particularly in a figure known as Ibn Taymiyyah, who didn't really agree with the use of Sufi practices that were very much mainstream at the time, believing that they had strayed away from what he thought was supposed to have been the true teachings of the faith, right? And it often goes hand in hand with like Wahhabism, which is also a similar sort of puritanical form that wants to prioritize old, traditional ways of thinking. Which there isn't necessarily anything wrong with wanting to preserve tradition, but circling back, the Salafi YouTube rabbit hole that I'm referring to are like a series of YouTube channels that are about what I've been referring to as Musselmanity, detailing like theology and ethics and history and all that sort of stuff. And something that you should know about these YouTube channels is that they all tend to be like carbon copies of one another. They all follow a very, very similar format, a very similar template. They all have these peculiar names to them that the one that sticks out the most to me is the one known as Merciful Servant, along with others like Prophet's Path or One Message or other channels of that nature, but Merciful Servant was a big one, basically. And when I say they're all when I say a lot of them are carbon copies of each other, I mean that to a very high degree. They'll all have these intros with menacing quote-unquote music. Put a pin on that because it becomes irrelevant later. And then they all feature like some of the same people like over and over again. These, I guess we can call them, mega imams, mega sheikhs, like similar to mega pastors and mega priests, those types of people. And of course, the ones that they use most frequently would be like Ali Numan Khan or Imran Hussein or that one Sadiq Nasir or whatever his name is. And then there's some other fourth guy that I remember. I don't know all their names, and quite frankly, I don't really care that much about them. They're just your typical mega religious whatever. And another thing that they all have in common is that they all have this humming in the background, some sort of humming that more often than not tends to be the one that sounds that sounds a lot like the Majora's Mask Final Hours music. You know, the one that goes, and you got to make sure you got the melisma correct. You have to make sure you get that in too. And they're all kind of just carbon copies of each other in the sense that they all have the same features. They all repeat similar sermons from similar individuals that are well known within this sort of sphere, right? But basically, the reason why I was watching these types of videos is, I mean, they did like casually come up at first, and then I decided it wouldn't hurt to watch like one or two just to see what actually goes on, because you know, in case you guys haven't been in case you guys have been living under a rock these past few months, you'll know that the Musselman faith, as I call it, has been under a lot of fire in recent months with, you know, various like immigration crises around the world, like especially in places like Europe and Japan, where you have some of these gangs and other groups of people causing a ruckus to the point to where it usually depends on the country and people just had enough of them. And even within like all the stuff going on in like the Middle East that have been going on in the Middle East for the past several decades. And so it's basically been all over the news with all these people saying, oh, we're tired of these people, oh, we need them, whatever. And I watched these videos because I was genuinely curious to know what the faith actually taught. And I figured what better way to learn than, like, not even just go to the source. And so I was watching a lot of those videos. And a lot of the things that they were teaching and relaying, in all honesty, greatly resonated with me in many ways. And you might think, looking at this avatar that you're looking, yeah, this avatar that I'm using, you might not think, but this was long before I ever started YouTube, so this was years ago when I went down the rabbit hole. But I remember listening to like different verses and different, different like hadiths and various things of that nature, thinking, a lot of this genuinely resonates with me on a very profound level, to the point to where, you know, I decided to just take my shot and just learn more, I guess. But so I continued going down this rabbit hole, but one of the things that I noticed is that there were some very strange discrepancies between what these people and what the faith seems to teach, as opposed to what maybe the Quran, the primary scripture, seems to teach. In the sense that there were a lot of things that they were saying that I'm thinking to myself, there's no way that they actually believe this. And I'm thinking, well, what does the Quran actually say? And later on, years down the line, actually taking a look at what the Quran says, I realize, once again, there's a lot of discrepancies and a lot of inconsistencies between what they were teaching and what the Quran actually says. And in this video, I have a go-to example of this, and that is music. A lot of those same YouTube channels that I've been watching, a lot of them kept on saying that, oh, music is haram, or yeah, oh, it was invented by the devil in order to promote adultery. No, that's literally what they believe. They believe that music was invented by the devil during the time of Adam's son Seth in order to promote adultery, citing different types of music that exist today, namely within the Hollywood sphere of like Cardi B singing about her WAP, right? Which I understand that. No, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of debauchery within Hollywood. I mean, you've got people like Weinstein and P. Diddy all running around doing all sorts of heinous things. So I don't blame them for thinking that way, but at the same time, is music as a whole really that forbidden? And upon doing further research, I found, and this is something that I figured out on my own. I mean, others have pointed it out, like Fadia Faraji, I think that's his name. He's the Persian music theory guy on YouTube. You should go check him out. But music is not, even he mentioned that music is never mentioned in the Quran. Not even once. Music is never mentioned. And the thing is, the Quran is supposed to be the word of the Lord Almighty to them. And yet they say that it is forbidden, that, oh yes, the Lord has forbidden it. But like, if it's truly as forbidden as they think it is, then why doesn't the Quran say that it's forbidden? And as it turns out, it's Hadith and Sunnah that says that it's forbidden. Like, I remember the story about, well, not the one about Seth. I don't think that's in Hadith, or maybe it is, I don't remember. But I remember these two Hadith that were relayed in one of these videos where, like, there was a story of the messenger, and I'm calling him that on purpose, and some of his companions were passing by some band, and Abu Bakr put his fingers in his ears so that he didn't have to listen to it. And then there's another hadith where the messenger was invited to a party, and he went over only for him to pass out upon hearing music playing. And then he went to go to the same party the next day. As soon as he got there, he passed out as soon as he listened to music. And these are examples from Hadith as to why they believe that it is forbidden, or haram as it would be known within the Arabic language. And then another thing that they mentioned is that there was some talk show host, I'm not going to say who they are, but who interviewed this one guy who used to be in the sort of hip-hop sphere, who was talking about how you can't have the Quran memorized while also be able to listen to music, unless it was, say, like The Birds, or even recitations of the Quran. And I'm thinking to myself, how is it that you can't have both of these at once? I mean, we have ultra-Orthodox Jewish scribes in New York that have the entire Torah memorized because they've written it down so many times. And that's 5 books. If they can memorize 5 books, then I'm pretty sure your average person can not only have the Quran memorized, but also be able to listen to music. But they argued that it's in your heart, and there's no room, which maybe there's some truth to that, maybe there isn't, I don't really know. And then there was this other guy that was being interviewed about music, and the one thing that I actually remember is it affects your heart rate, which I can imagine, considering that music has a rhythm. Which reminds me, one of the guys in the videos that was being quoted or clipped was all like, you know, the beat of music, it's the devil causing you to tap your finger or whatever the hell. And I'm thinking to myself, there's no way that they actually believe this. But the thing is, when you really get right down to it, if music is truly as haram as they say it is, then why is it so good for plants? Scientific studies have shown that music can help plants grow. And there are plenty of studies that help prove this, especially certain types of music can help them grow. And another thing is that, remember how I told you to put a pin on when I first started talking about these YouTube channels. Yeah, the intros, they have this menacing music that sounds like something straight out of a horror game, like that goes something like that. And then once again, they have the humming in the background. And I'm thinking to myself, how is that not music? Tell me in what way is that not music? And so I think you guys can understand what it is that I'm getting at. It's like the Quran never mentions music even once, yet here they are categorically stating that it's forbidden simply because something that isn't the Quran says it is. That being hadith, correct? I mean, for those that don't know, hadith is the collection of narrations of like teachings and sayings and deeds of the messenger, and where the aggregate, I don't think that's the right word for it, where the aggregate of these teachings in general is referred to as sunnah, which is the namesake of the Sunni branch, correct? As opposed to the Shia branch, which I don't remember what that name means, but that's irrelevant to this discussion. And so I basically wanted to talk about hadith in particular. There's a lot of... Hadith is considered very important to the Muslim faith, where a majority of the faith's practices that aren't explicitly outlined in the Quran are listed there. Like the 5 daily prayers is a good example of this. And even certain other aspects are present in hadith in particular, including the more controversial aspects that people tend to have a problem with. A large portion of those aspects can be traced to hadith itself. And now some of you are probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? If hadith is an important part, then what exactly is the big deal here? And the big deal is that there seems to, like I said earlier, there's a lot of discrepancies between what the Quran says and what they actually teach and stuff. Like the thing about hadith compared to the Quran is that the Quran, at least we know, was like written down around the time that the messenger was supposed to have lived. And we have evidence of this from like the Birmingham manuscript and the Sana'a manuscript. And I'm aware that the Sana'a manuscript is a palimpsest, meaning it was erased and copied over. Like I know that there is a hadith that says there's like 7 versions of the Quran, and maybe that was one of them. But all versions that exist today are all based on what's known as the Uthman Codex. I think that was what it's called. But regardless, at least it was written down during his time, as opposed to hadith, which wasn't written down until some 200 years or so after the messenger was supposed to have lived. And so the question is, how do we know that these hadiths actually go back to when, or actually can be attributed to the messenger himself? Because those are passed down orally for the most part. And oral tradition is not the most reliable form of transmission when we get right down to it. So, I mean, we can use the Iliad and the Odyssey, for example. Like, before Homer compiled and, like, composed all of it, it was a series of many different smaller pieces that were all passed down by, like, bards and stuff. And we know that they're based on, like, the Trojan War, which, for the most part, we know happened. We know where Troy is, and we have Hittite records that have a lot of parallels with what's written in the Iliad and the Odyssey. But it happened some 500 to 700 years before Homer. I don't remember the exact times, so don't quote me on any of that, but they barely happened over only half a century ago. But the Iliad and Odyssey is filled with the stories of gods and stuff. Like, we know that the Iliad, we know that the Trojan War happened. It was a real historical event. Whether or not, like, the Trojan horse existed, we don't really know, because it's wood. It was made of wood, and wood decays, so it would be very hard to preserve anyway. But the Iliad and Odyssey is embellished with the stories of gods and other supernatural beings intervening and stuff. And if all of that can be added within 500 years of them being passed down, then who's to say something similar couldn't have happened to like Hadith, which only had 200 years. Granted, that's not to say that we shouldn't just knock oral tradition, because there are some oral traditions that have been passed down with precision, namely like the Vedic traditions. Those weren't like the oldest written copy of the Rig Veda that we have only goes back to the 1600s, but it's allegedly been orally passed down for 4,000 years at most, or even at least, to the point to where they have a lot of mnemonic devices to be able to remember every single word and every single verse, and even every single syllable is accounted for in the Rig Veda Samhita specifically. Like, they would repeat a verse, they would repeat each word in the verse, they would say one word, say the next word twice, and then say the word before it, and I think there's even one where they say the verses backwards. So, in that case, they clearly knew what they were doing. And then there's like some Australian Aboriginal traditions that have been passing down the stories of islands that sank into the sea for over 8,000 years. And when like scientists and oceanographers or whoever went to like investigate and do research in and around the coast of Australia, there are quite a few cases where they're like, there was an island over here that did sink over 8,000 years ago. So even within that context, you shouldn't really just completely discount oral tradition. I mean, yes, some of those stories are also embellished to a degree. Like, I think one of them involved some lady traveling to the island and that she caused it to sink, but, you know. But when it comes to something like the Iliad and the Odyssey, obviously there were a lot of embellishments that clearly took place. And the same thing could have happened with Hadith. Now, Hadith only had 200 years, but that doesn't mean that there aren't embellishments. I mean, one could possibly point to what is known as the Night Journey, otherwise known as Misda wa Miraj, or I don't know if I'm saying that right, but yeah. And another one of these examples could have been the idea of music being haram. I mean, the Quran never mentions music, yet you have all these hadith that do for some reason. You would think that if the Lord didn't want anyone listening to music, he would have already mentioned it in his word, right? But then this brings up a very important facet about hadith that involves their authenticity, quote unquote. Because there are a lot of hadith that are classified as being authentic, inauthentic, or ambiguously authentic. And there are a lot of quote-unquote authentic hadith that seem to conflict with the Quran in more ways than one. There are quite a few examples that I can think of off the top of my head, but the one that I'm focusing on right now is music. Once again, music is forbidden within these hadith, but the Quran never mentions music. And when it comes to the authenticity of hadiths, they have what are known as chains of narration. Like they'll say that, this hadith was narrated by this guy under the authority of some other guy who said that they heard that a friend of a companion of the messenger said that the messenger said and done this. And I'm thinking to myself, who exactly gave that other guy the authority to allow this one guy to even narrate it in the first place? How do we know that such people can even be trusted to have preserved what they think are the teachings and the life and sayings of the messenger in question? Now, one of the arguments that people will bring up in favor of things like hadith is that, well, the Quran says to obey the Lord and his messenger. And what better way to obey his messenger than by actually paying heed to his words, or what they think is his words? And then I will say, how do you know that these are the messenger's words? They'll say, well, because it's authentic. This one's authentic. And I'll say to them, well, how do you know it's authentic? And then they'll say, well, it's a reliable chain of narration. And then I'll say, how do you know the chain of narration is reliable? And then they'll say, well, because these people that are narrating were known for being very trustworthy. And then I will say, well, how do you know we can trust them? How do you know that they're not in cahoots with each other when it comes to making religious laws, among other things? And then I think the ultimate gotcha against someone like me, they would say, well, how do you know the Quran is even the word of the Lord? To which I will say, well, I don't know that. But if it is the will of the Lord, or the word of the Lord, sorry, then why aren't you prioritizing it as your source of law and teaching, as opposed to these other things that you don't even know if they're even authentic, since they haven't been written down for 200 years? I mean, you could argue that the Quran hasn't been preserved perfectly. I mean, the consonantal skeleton has more or less been preserved, but whether or not we actually know the proper way that it's supposed to be read is definitely up for debate, which is actually one of the purposes of this new series of videos. But regardless, I think you can understand why I don't refer to it by what most people call it. Why I don't refer to it as... why I refer to it as Musselmanity instead of what would be known in Arabic as Islam. And regarding things that the faith teaches are forbidden, but the Quran never quite mentions, or maybe it does mention it, but it's not as forbidden as you might think. Another good example of this is tattoos. The mainstream, obviously, Musselmanity teaches that, well, not all of them say this, but I remember this one guy, I'm not going to say who it is, tried to ask Grok if tattoos were forbidden, to which Grok was all like, there is debate among scholars about whether or not it is. He barely read the first sentence and then he categorically said that, oh yes, it's haram. Even though, and this is where I circle back, the Quran never mentions tattoos. Tattoos are never mentioned. Granted, the Quran teaches to dress modestly in a way that doesn't draw too much attention to yourself, which, fair enough, but tattoos are never mentioned. I think, and I might be wrong on this, but I think it's a mostly hadith thing. And it might be partially based on the Torah in particular seems to indicate that tattoos are forbidden, teaching not to mark your skin. I don't remember the exact Torah verse that says that, but, you know. And another thing, in addition to things that are quote-unquote haram, also like halal as well, things that are promoted, like one example would be like circumcision. Apparently most Muslim men get themselves circumcised, even though the Quran never mentioned circumcision. But according to Hadith, the messenger got circumcised because Abraham got circumcised, right? It's kind of a command, isn't it? I think it's a commandment in the Torah. Like, Abraham was supposed to have circumcised himself as a testament to his faith in the Lord. And so, and because, like, the Torah and the Gospels and others are considered as scripture or previous scriptures in the Quran, obviously, yeah, why don't you do that? But the thing is, the Quran itself teaches that it takes over for previous scriptures. And once again, circumcisions are never mentioned. So why exactly do we do it? Or why do they do it, even though it's not necessary? So that's 3 examples right off the bat of discrepancies between what the Quran teaches and what the tradition as a whole does. Like, they say music is haram even though it's never mentioned, and they say tattoos are haram even though it's never mentioned, and they say that circumcision is obligatory even though even that's never mentioned. And so now you know why I refer to it as Musselmanity. And there are a number of other reasons why. I could, once again, this is just the first of multiple videos on the subject. I apologize if it sounds like that this rambling isn't as coherent as it could be. This is unscripted and unedited because I just wanted to get my raw thoughts out there. But once again, there are other examples of these discrepancies. A very good example that will be getting its own video is regarding the age of Aisha when she married the messenger, because she was allegedly 6 when they married, and that the marriage was consummated when they were 9, all the while the messenger was in his 40s. I will be making a video about that, but it's going to take a little research. You might be surprised. And then there are other things that I intend on talking about within this little series of videos. But before I end this video in particular, there is a huge elephant in the room for all of the people that have been keeping up with my channel in particular. And that is, I'm gay. And so you might be very confused as to why a gay guy is even talking about any of this. You might be thinking, well, don't they throw gay people off buildings or force them to get sex change operations? First of all, the Quran never says any of that, so you can already go ahead and throw away any notions of whether or not that's even okay. And second, don't worry. That's also going to be its own video. I have found a way to reconcile between my sexuality and my feelings regarding the tradition. And you might also be surprised by that as well. But until that happens, thank you all so much for watching this video. This is a video like this was a long time coming. It's a pretty lengthy one. As OBS says, it's like 33 minutes at least, but it's just with everything that's been happening in the world as of recently, from like various migration crises and gangs and all of that other stuff, with like people with gangs committing heinous acts, all because they think that it's allowed within their tradition, all because they think that they can get away with it, knowing that anyone who dares to call them out will end up getting arrested, particularly in the UK. And they'll usually get arrested for longer than the actual assailants. And not only that, you have people talking about how, oh, yeah, you guys aren't having as many kids, so we're gonna replace you. With others holding signs saying that they are gonna dominate the world, and I'm thinking to myself, really? Do you seriously think that? Do you seriously believe that they're going to take that lying down? Do you seriously believe someone like me, who has read more than enough of the Quran to know that a lot of these people are full of shit? are going to take it lying down? No. You guys have another thing coming. And I'm not going to let you tell me otherwise. You get it? These people, those people with the superiority complex that think that they can say or do whatever they want simply because their tradition says so, or they claim that it does. Those people, in my eyes, are the real kafirs, the deniers of reality, the true munafiqun. They say that they believe, but they don't. They say, we believe in the Lord in the last day, but they don't. They go back to their strayers and say, we believe you instead. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found this relatively interesting, even if I'm very much in the absolute minority when it comes to these sentiments that I'm sharing. But if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, a comment, subscribe, share the video, notification bell, and all that. And go ahead and let me know how not only am I a blasphemous heretic that deserves to burn in Gehenna, or if you're on the other side, because I'm likely going to get attacked by all sides, to be fair, that I'm an apologist grifter that's still gonna burn in hell anyway. Take care, everyone. Salam alaikum.